Hi, I'm Liz Marquis, and I'm here to help you support the older adults in your life. This is Aging Well Anyway, a podcast dedicated to empowering those navigating the journey of aging and celebrating the life that comes with aging well. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Aging Well Anyway. During today's episode, we're going to talk about the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. And I'm going to introduce you to John Thomson, former Deputy Commissioner of Insurance Regulation for the state of Connecticut. Now, John and I met when I was working in senior living marketing, and he was assistant dean and a professor at the University of Hartford's Barney School of Business. John asked me to come and be a guest lecturer in one of his classes and talk to his students about skilled nursing in Connecticut, primarily how to pay for it. Now, over the course of talking to his students, who were comprised of business and healthcare students, it became very clear that there was a lot of confusion between these two programs. And even though Medicare and Medicaid sound similar, and they are both government programs designed to facilitate access to healthcare coverage and help pay for related costs to those who qualify, they are in fact very different. Today, John's going to walk us through eligibility, benefits, and coverage to not only help us all understand these two programs better, but to help you and your family make more informed decisions. I hope you learn as much today from John as I have over the years. Thank you for listening. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Aging Well Anyway. I'm Liz Marquis, and today we're going to tackle a topic that can be overwhelming, can be confusing, and I'd like to introduce today's guest, John Thomson. He's going to be talking to us today about Medicare and Medicaid. John is an expert in this area, holds an MBA in finance and management. He received his license as an associate professional insurance regulator and holds a certificate in cybersecurity oversight. In addition, if that's not enough, John has been an insurance executive for over 25 years, holding operational and regulatory leadership roles, namely as the Deputy Commissioner of Insurance Regulation for the state of Connecticut. How John and I know each other, he was also the Assistant Dean of the University of Hartford Barney School of Business, as well as a professor. And he is now the managing principal of Operational Risk Solutions and helps companies manage risk while improving operational performance, which is timely because as we start to talk about insurance and operational management and how to tap into it, this is a perfect topic. And I welcome John.
Thanks, Liz. It's really good to be here, and I appreciate your introduction. You're very kind.
Well, we know this is a confusing topic, and the way that I know it's confusing is because, to me, they sound similar, Medicare and Medicaid, and sometimes when I talk to people, they will use these terms interchangeably. Even though they may sound similar, we know there are huge and significant differences. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, absolutely. And I will be perfectly honest because there's times when I get into discussions of these two that I actually misspeak and use one term over the other. And it is one of those issues that is out there and it appears so unintelligible, not understandable, esoteric or whatever. But it's really important that we as individuals, all of us sort of have this understanding of what Medicaid and what Medicare is and how they work together, how they don't work together, and how they fit into sort of this larger, very complex, confusing environment that we all find ourselves in when we're making our own personal decisions or decisions for loved ones, that we really need to sort of stop and take some time and understand the components and how they work together and don't work together and move forward. So, Liz.
Yeah, well, one of my questions is, just to be very clear, Medicare and Medicaid is separate from private insurance. So the insurance that you would have subscribed to through an employer, correct?
That's totally correct. And that's part of the confusion. Many people, including myself, was when I approached the age of 65, not that I'm giving away my age, but yes, I'm over 65. But when I approached that time, I didn't know, do I have to register? I'm working full-time. I have full-time insurance. Do I need to register for Medicare?
Right. Do you?
And so, interestingly, I, as a personal story, I didn't. And then I wound up actually, when I ultimately did move towards retirement, I had some issues actually registering later, because they said you should have applied when you were 65, regardless whether you were still working and covered under private insurance.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know that. So that's an example of how we all are consumers and impacted by these components. But it's important that we start to understand how they work together.
Good, because if you were working and you had private insurance, I would automatically assume that you wouldn't need Medicare, which is a government-issued insurance, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And in a minute, when I get into sort of talking about Medicare, I'm going to have a little overview here. You'll understand that there's subcomponents of Medicare to make things even more confusing. And you need to understand that, for example, when you're age 65, you're eligible immediately for Part A if you've been working for the appropriate amount of time. And that becomes primary, even though you have private insurance, which becomes from being primary to becoming secondary. And they work together. But I don't want to confuse things at this point, but those are some of the intricacies, an example of the intricacies that we need to be aware of. So it's important and imperative that we build sort of an understanding of how this system or dysfunction environment that we live in actually works and doesn't work.
Because I would think that people would, I think approaching 65, I would want to transition over to Medicare, give up my private insurance, and let the government insurance take over. Can you define Medicare in a nutshell?
Well, absolutely. And I think Medicare is defined specifically as a program that was put in place as an amendment to Social Security, Social Security was put in place in the mid-1930s.
Oh my gosh, but that's such a long time ago.
It's a very long time ago. And not that it's that important, but you just need to understand that some of this stuff has some legacy roots for its dysfunction because of this age of existence. But Medicare came into existence in 1965 as an amendment to the original Social Security Act that was put in place, because it basically provided the first, not just replacement earnings for a person who is retired, but in 1965 was put in place to provide some economic support for individuals for their health care needs that they were having as people were aging and actually living longer and having these continuing health care needs. The need evolved, and in the mid-1960s, Medicare was implemented in its basic existence in terms of two parts. Medicare consists today of four parts, but when it was founded, the first part was Part A, which is providing medical care or financing and funds for health care as an inpatient in a hospital or to a nursing home for some rehab after a hospitalization. But Part A is then we pay for that Part A, all of us, as we work. When we started our first job, our employer and ourselves paid a payroll tax to the federal government for Part A. And so automatically when we turn 65, everyone who has the appropriate amount of working quarters is eligible for Medicare Part A as primary. And that's a very important piece.
Okay, so if we were to take a look in the rear view, and Social Security was implemented almost 100 years ago as a subsidy for retirement. So that's money you would get when you retired. And then you fast forward 30 years or so until Medicare is put in, because medical advances and healthcare has improved so much so that people were living longer in retirement, longer potentially than expected in retirement. And so Medicare Part A was put in place to cover the costs of a hospital stay, either inpatient in a hospital for illness or an emergency, or in a rehab, so you can get better in an acute setting, in a hospital type setting, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So we're living even longer now.
That's correct.
And so,
and
yeah.
Absolutely. And actually our world's changed because at that time, inpatient hospital care costs were rising very rapidly. And so it put increased pressure on the needs that an individual had. So this was an attempt to provide some financial support for that. And so that's where Part A came into it when Medicare was put in place. The other piece of basic Medicare, which is Part A and Part B, the second part is what they call Part B, which provides for funding for paying for health care for the providers outside of the acute care setting, for example, the hospital. And it provides some access for some level of preventative care, what was sort of preventative care in 1965, which is sort of a basic healthy Medicare annual visit or something like that. But then if you needed physician care, physician specialist care, laboratory work or whatever, that's where Part B comes in to pay for those when you need those services, but you're not acutely ill and not needing to be hospitalized to receive that care.
So if we were thinking about it in a way of building blocks, as you'd mentioned earlier, the foundation was Part A, which covered the hospital stay, which still is potentially the highest cost in healthcare is a hospital or rehab stay. And then Part B was a building block added on to Part A to cover the doctor's visits, or another specialist visit, so outside.
That's correct.
So they're adding on to it. Then what?
Well, then we, as time progressed and our environment and people continued to live longer, as they lived longer, they tend to have more healthcare emerging needs. It needed to be revamped. And one of the emerging needs was then people needed access and needed to pay for prescription drugs, which was not covered under Part A or Part B. And the Social Security and the federal government was wise and just put in place what they call now Part D, which is for prescription drugs, and it provides an access to it. But Medicare and the what they call the CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, which is a governmental agency which kind of guides and regulates and facilitates these benefits, did not want to take on the federal government funding that, so they created a Part D, which provided for private insurance industry, to step into that role and provide insurance vehicles that help individuals access and pay for their pharmaceutical needs.
Okay, so Part D, just so I understand this, Part D covers prescriptions. Rather than going directly to the consumer, Part D, does it always go through an insurance carrier for coverage?
To access Part D, you have to enroll with a private insurance provider for that.
Oh, understood.
And the Center for Medicaid Services prepares an approved list of private insurance companies which can perform that role. Some of them now are pharmacy benefit managers. Some pharmacy benefit managers are also insurance companies, but some of them aren't health insurance companies, but some of them are not. There's an array of companies, but they have to be approved by the Center for Medicaid Services to be in this Part D space.
Okay.
But the individual consumer contracts with a approved insurance or provider or pharmacy benefit provider for that Part D benefits under their Medicare program.
Okay. So I can't help but notice that we missed C. We have A, Part B, we have D. Right. What happened to C?
Well, it's interesting because in terms of timeline, we kind of jumped, but Part C of Medicare is what they call Medicare Advantage. Okay. And that is an option that is available to all Medicare-eligible individuals to access their health care through a private insurance company that substitutes for the benefits they would receive under Medicare Part A and Part B.
So you can do Medicare Part A or B, A and B, or Medicare Advantage.
That's correct.
Okay.
And when you, just to extend that a little bit, Liz, to add confusion to this very complex situation, is that you typically would have either Medicare Part A and or Part B and or D.
Okay.
Or you would go to a Medicare Advantage program, which typically bundles those three things into a private offering that you can subscribe to. Behind the scenes, the Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, which kind of administers these very complex, confusing programs, they actually contract with the private insurer when providing, for example, a flat reimbursement rate, and they say, we will give you $10,000 to take care of this individual for 12 months for these things that kind of come under inpatient, outpatient medical, and prescription costs. And if you want to add to that, which these companies did, they added some add-on things like access to hearing, dental benefits, vision benefits, things that are excluded under traditional basic Medicare, so that they attract consumers to enroll and avoid and opt out of traditional Medicare Part A, B, and D and go to a Medicare Advantage program, which embraces all those.
So that's an option for consumers to take advantage of Medicare Advantage if that's something that they think is better for them. I understand how the insurance companies might want to offer a Medicare Advantage plan because they're guaranteed government funding for that. Is that right? Okay.
That's correct.
And
they get a flat fee for taking care of that individual for a policy period, usually 12 months.
And we said $10,000 as an example. We don't know actually what the government would pay a private insurance company for offering Medicare Advantage. But there's a benefit for an insurance company to do that. So if I am on Medicare A and B and D, and I decide that my insurance company that I'm familiar with offers a Medicare Advantage plan, and it offers all of those extras, all of those nice to haves like vision coverage, hearing coverage, dental coverage. They might even reimburse me for my gym membership.
That's correct.
And I go to a Medicare Advantage plan. I'm feeling pretty good about it.
You should. And that's actually what has happened. And as a result, Liz, just to give you some perspective, is that now more Americans access care after age 65 through Medicare Advantage than through traditional Medicare.
Okay. And so we're talking about an elder health care. So you mentioned over 65. Right. So all of these, everything we're talking about today is to support elder health care or aging health care, actually.
That's right.
So let's say I'm on Medicare Advantage and I decide that I don't want Medicare Advantage anymore. I would like to go back to my Medicare A and B. I felt a little more comfortable with that. Now what? How can I do that? Can I?
Well, yes, you can. And you do that when there are what they call open enrollment periods that are put in place statutorily that permit people to enroll in or change their benefits during specific periods of time. And so you have to be aware of that. And I don't want to go into it because it's another layer of complication, but it basically is so many months before January 1st and so many months after. And you as an individual can make a change at that time. The issue is that it's very simple to go from traditional Medicare to Medicare Advantage.
Okay.
The problem is when you try to go back, because many of these private companies will put in some restrictions like pre-existing condition limits if you come back from a Medicare Advantage to traditional Medicare, or they may have where you have a waiting period before you can submit or be compensated or receive any benefits under Part A, Part B, or Part D. Because of a pre-existing condition, you have to wait before that happens, and that can leave a gap which you have to pay for and out of your pocket if you access care during that pre-existing condition limit. So it's something to be done on an informed basis, that you've got that potential, and you need to make sure you understand that and what the impact might be to you as a consumer in terms of not being able to receive the care or services, or not being able to have them paid for by your program.
Okay. So if I am on Medicare Advantage and I decide I'd like to go back to A and B, Medicare A and B, you're saying that there could potentially be a waiting period where
That's correct.
I have a gap.
That's right.
And I will have to pay out of pocket somehow.
And you have to pay out of pocket. So many individuals made that migration from Part A, Part B, Part D, Medicare to Medicare Advantage because for a number of reasons. There was more comprehensive care. It was all under one piece, very nice and neat and easy for administration purposes. But there was also a very attractive feature because typically the cost contribution for the Medicare Advantage is significantly less than what they would pay for Part A, Part B, and Part D through the traditional Medicare system. And so that made it very attractive to people who are, aging and starting to looking at their managing will I have enough money to retire through my latter part of my living, that they would say, oh, I'll go to a Medicare Advantage because the cost is so much better and I can have that money available to spend on other things I want to spend it on.
Okay. I have a question now on providers. So under my insurance through my employer, some providers that I have been using or want to use, they're considered out of network. Do you run into providers that could be out of network under a Medicare Advantage plan versus a Part A and Part B?
The answer is yes and yes.
Okay.
But in different ways.
Okay.
Medicare Part A, Part B, providers have the option of accepting Medicare and as a reimbursement piece. Some providers don't take Medicare today, but the network of Medicare providers is very broad. Most providers and most institutions will accept Medicare.
Yes.
But some won't.
Okay.
And there's some specialty hospitals that won't take Medicare. Okay. Pretty much you're on your own. You want to have our services, we're happy to provide them, but you must pay for them yourself. We're not going to deal with reimbursement from them because the reimbursement levels for Medicare are negotiated and are significantly less than the costs that private insurers have in terms of their negotiations with network providers. Because most providers of healthcare are not insurance companies. They're clinical professionals who deliver the care and so forth. And they have a patient mix where they have so many Medicare patients and paid for under those programs or alternative programs, and how many are paid for under traditional insurance, like through employer-based healthcare, which we have in this country. And so they make a decision about how that works. Medicare Advantage programs typically have what we call narrower or smaller networks that you can access from your medical services under their program. Their network is significantly smaller than the network of Medicare providers. But so you are limited, and you're limited geographically typically, and that can become a problem. If you spend your winters in a warm climate and your summers up north in a cooler climate, you may have issues, and you have to be mindful of who takes which network, and you can find yourselves in one side or the other in an out-of-network situation where you only will receive reimbursement for emergency care, not for routine or regular medical care. So that network thing, Liz, that you mentioned is very important to keep in mind for both pieces, but particularly for Medicare Advantage because the networks tend to be smaller and narrower for Medicare Advantage.
So if you're trying to decide if you're going to switch from Medicare A and B to a Medicare Advantage plan, you should really do your homework ahead of time and make sure that the providers that you're currently using or want to use are within that Medicare Advantage network.
That's absolutely correct. And it's another example of is that really an essential layer of confusion to add on to the consumer's piece?
Right.
It's like, unfortunately, yes, it's there. And you just need to be mindful of that. Okay. But it is understandable. It's just being able to understand how these things work in conjunction with it.
Good. So we've covered Medicare. And so in a nutshell, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm simplifying it in my own mind, is Medicare serves as your health insurance. It covers your hospital stays, your in-network hospital stays, doctor's visits, specialist visits, rehab stays, and if you have Medicare, it is your pharmacy or Medicare.
Correct.
So that really takes the place of your health care coverage. It becomes the payer source for health care. So
that's correct.
Medicaid has, the word aid in it instead of care. So I understand Medicare is for my health care. Medicaid is very different. Can you define Medicaid for me?
Absolutely. I will do that. And I want to take just a second and talk about one more clarification of Medicare.
Okay.
Medicare provides for clinical health care issues and services.
Okay.
And care if you need inpatient care. It does not, and neither does Medicare Advantage. Neither of those provide long-term care needs that an individual may have as they age. And they have a loss of their ability to perform activities of daily living, like feeding themselves, dressing themselves, bathing themselves, getting in and out of bed, and things like that. Those are what we call activities of daily living. And that determines where you may need some additional care or support in a assisted living or independent living type environment, or potentially skilled nursing. And those are significant, but they are not covered by Medicare or Medicare Advantage.
Okay. And they also wouldn't be covered under your typical health insurance if you had an employer-based health insurance.
Right.
Okay.
The confusion comes because oftentimes, if you are an older adult and you're in an acute care setting in a hospital, as you heal and continue to recover, you may not need the acute care, but you still need some level of it. So they're going to look to discharge you or move you to a lower care environment, in a rehab type of situation for a period of time, maybe up to 90 days. Okay. But that's all you get in terms of medical help. But that's helping the medical provider have a lower cost in terms of meeting your support needs as well as the clinical access that you need.
Okay. So you can access your Medicare benefit in a short-term rehab.
Right. So it may create some confusion. Say, well, you put my loved one in a skilled nursing environment, but it was a step-down care stay versus kind of an extended long-term care need that they could or might have at some point in their life.
Yeah. So Medicare would rather pay for someone to rehab in a lower cost environment, like a post-acute, subacute environment than stay in the hospital. I understand.
That's correct.
Because we've been working with some families who, a loved one will have a hip replacement, and they're feeling like they're being discharged from the hospital to a post-acute environment. And we want that to be a safe transition, but we do know that Medicare will follow that person to that rehab environment. Got it.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's right. Now, let me talk about Medicaid.
Okay.
And Medicaid you think of it, it has the AID at the end. That's very clever on your part because I never thought about that, Liz. But I think that's really a great way to distinguish and remember
I'm trying to simplify in my own mind to remember.
That's right. Well, and we all need to have that clarity and simplification. What Medicaid is a program that's shared by both the federal government and administered by the states to provide financial support and financing for healthcare needs for people who meet low income level criteria because of their economic situation.
So it's finance-based.
Correct.
Benefit.
It typically follows a lot of the structure and processes of Medicare or even just traditional healthcare regulations. But it's basically a financing mechanism. The majority of the money in the Medicaid programs come from the federal government, which transfers that money to the individual states for their administration. But the federal government for Medicaid establishes those income level criteria which are used to determine who's eligible for Medicaid and who's not. But it provides medical financing for an array of people, not just older people, but for people who are unemployed, who are financially struggling, people who may not have access to health care. It can provide actually paying for childhood access to health care and so forth. So it's a way of providing additional access for people because of their economic situation, not necessarily their age.
Okay.
And so the majority of the funds come from the federal government, and they're given to the states, passed out to the states, and the states then administer it. What we're seeing at the moment is a lot of debate over the amount of money that the federal government is willing or able on a prospective basis to put towards Medicaid programs. And so they're considering significant cuts to that federal funding.
So they're considering cutting Medicaid funds that they would distribute to the state for the state to then distribute to the people in their state that need
That's correct.
Need it. Okay.
That need it. So what that will do is actually puts a huge burden, financial burden, on the individual states now, because the federal government is saying, great program, we can't afford to pay for it anymore. If you want to continue it in your state, go ahead, but you're going to have to fund that at the state level because we're not going to be able to provide it at the levels we've provided historically for Medicaid.
So states are going to feel the squeeze if their Medicaid funding is reduced.
That's right. Okay. And states have to figure out, okay, do we have the revenue and state and the financial resources to fill that potential loss? And if we don't, if we want to continue it, are we going to cut what we spend on other areas in the state, like highway construction, education, all kinds of other programs, it says state public health programs, vaccination programs, et cetera, that are funded, may have to be reduced or terminated because they can't afford it anymore. The issue with Medicaid is that while the more money, it's basically administered by the states. And in the environment we're in right now, it's sort of like the states, if you want to spend your money on this, go ahead. But we're not able to provide you with the federal support that we've had in the past. So that has a lot of impacts for a lot of people, whether it covers a huge number of baby deliveries are paid for by that for pregnant women who don't have the financial resources or access to private insurance for their delivery. It covers a lot of people who need it as older adults. But it really is a problem because many older adults are able to use the money in Medicaid to pay for their Medicare programs where they need to pay money if they're typically like under a Medicare A, B, and D program. And so there's a potential that those people may lose their Medicaid support and have to figure out, how am I going to pay for just my basic Medicare programs because of my income level is below the poverty level set by the federal government. They may not have access to that anymore. So this is a very important thing to keep an eye on because Medicaid may be lost or be only able to reduce in a certain level of reimbursement for medical care and medical services and long-term care. Now, Medicaid will pay for nursing home services, unlike Medicare.
Right. This is what I wanted to bring up. If you are on Medicaid because of your financial scenario, are there providers, like how small is your network? Does it get even smaller that there are some providers, and you mentioned nursing homes, that may not accept Medicaid? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And actually, even if they did accept Medicaid, there are many providers of long-term care in senior communities or whatever that their actual costs significantly exceed the amount of financial resources that are provided by Medicaid.
Yes.
So while a parent may be able to be placed in a nursing home of some sort,
yes,
and they may be accepted under Medicaid, the level of care and the quality of care they receive may be questionable.
Well, because so if you're a senior living community and you're a nursing home and you're accepting, because we talked about this a little bit earlier, that the provider is working with a mix of patients or people that have a variety of payer sources, whether it is private insurance, private pay, which is something that we really didn't talk about and will not maybe cover here, and Medicaid. But if you're a nursing home and you're admitting patients or residents on Medicare, it could be private pay and Medicaid, am I correct in saying that the Medicaid patient is paying less essentially because the Medicaid benefit is less?
That's correct.
So,
but many of these providers of long-term care in these communities that are there are now starting to strategically reposition themselves so that they have less of those people in their system under their care and supervisory functions because the level of reimbursement is so low.
So it's not that the community or the nursing home, they still have their operating expenses. They still have staffing and resources and infrastructure improvement and food and heating utilities, all of that. Their operating expenses do not fluctuate based on who they've admitted. They can't reduce their operating expenses because they've got a high population of Medicaid patients. So the communities essentially are having to fill that gap.
That's right.
So if they've got half Medicaid patients and half private pay patients, they've got to bridge that gap somehow in covering their operating expenses. And so what you're saying is that some of these communities are changing their model, their business model, to reduce the amount of Medicaid residents that they will actually accept, knowing that they have that gap to fill. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And sort of the other reality is sort of if you choose and select that option as the way for providing your long-term care needs for your loved one or yourself, you're going to be limited in terms of the type of quality of care or the geography of where that care can be placed.
Yes.
And you may find a match in the nursing home system, but the nursing home that provides a skilled nursing facility may be 45 miles from the rest of the family lives, but that's the only available resource for that patient, and that's how it will work. And that becomes more problematic as people realize it. Once again, it's another level of confusion and complexity that consumers are struggling with to understand how is this working this way,
right?
And that the actual programs function very differently than what we think that they do. And so we have to eliminate those misperceptions and understand the reality in terms of what the situation is for the care.
Well, you told me a story when you were teaching at the Barney School of Business at the University of Hartford. You told me a story about your students and the misconception, being a little naive because I know a lot, we've been hearing Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid as all being government programs that we will take advantage of. Can you repeat that story?
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting because I use that as a way to help set in the minds of the students, many of whom I said, well, let's think about your grandparent, because typically that's very common for a college level age student to be thinking about, because their grandparents are still alive and with them. And I said, well, what are you going to do? What is your grandparents? Well, they retired on Social Security, and they don't have to worry about it, so they'll get Social Security, and so they'll be taken care of. While Social Security is a whole nother topic for a whole nother podcast or two.
Right.
It's basically it never was intended to provide full replacement of lifelong earnings. It was basically a safety net for people back in the mid-1930s and what they needed for basic food, clothing, shelter, or the hierarchy of needs, if you will. It was for their needs, not for their wants.
Right. And the average age expectancy.
That's right. And it's fun. That's
lower.
right. And so the students are misread. You cannot, no one, I don't think, can really retire today on Social Security.
Right.
Even if you receive the maximum benefit, you're stretching to be able to do that. So that's a reality. The students thought, and they were like stunned that I can't live and I can't, buy a boat with my Social Security benefit. No, you can't. You won't be able to make it. But then I'd ask them about, what about your grandparent? Your grandmother is around and she needs some extended care and your family can't provide it for them anymore. And they said, well, we'll just put my grandmother in a nursing home and Medicare will cover for that. And the answer is no, Medicare doesn't cover for that. And then it's sort of like, well, what about Medicaid? Well, Medicaid will pay for certain things, but the individual who's being cared for has to meet these economic requirements. And they would have to become actually indigent in a ward of the state for Medicaid to really carry them through to the nursing home stay. And it's just not a happy ending to the care of what most people are faced with as taking care of their family member or loved one.
It was just a story that highlighted the misconception of the safety net that we all thought or think that is out there for us as we age. Because when we all want to age well, we all want to have the retirement of our dreams, but that retirement of our dreams may not be supported by Social Security, Medicare, and certainly not by Medicaid. So I think the important thing to remember now is as people are making decisions, whether to, tap into Medicare, A and B or D, or Medicare Advantage, or if you are on for your health insurance coverage, or you are considering or looking towards applying for Medicaid, which is financial based, that you really have to take into consideration the access that you could potentially have to healthcare providers and skilled nursing facilities.
That's correct. And the other piece of that, the corollary that goes along with that, Liz, is the fact is that what works today may not work for the individual in the future, because the needs may evolve for that individual, that they need more issues. They may have a physical issue today. They may develop dementia, which adds a whole new level of complexity and needs from a care perspective. Or they may develop another medical issue which wasn't contemplated that requires a higher level of care or access to services that they haven't been receiving. So it's important to be, you're in the moment, but you got to be prepared to pivot at any point in time because of that.
Which can be hard, because I don't think a lot of us sort of think about, well, what if we develop this? What if this happens? Because we all are looking forward. We're all looking forward to a happy future and thinking that we're going to be well taken care of by the systems that we have in place now for our health situation that we're in right now.
That's right. We all have this basic human nature that we want to know what it is, and we'll deal with it and get to what it is, but we don't want to look at what that it might become in the future. And I can sum it up because I can remember taking care of my mother and her aging, and at one point she looked at me and she said, John, old age or aging is not for sissies.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a kind of a very interesting way of putting it from her perspective as an aging adult. And then it really helps us all remember we've got to think about, through the eyes and through the mind of the loved one, as well as through our issue in terms of how do we provide the support that we can, both emotional, physical, and financial support for our loved one for the needs that they have as they age in their life journey.
Well, I think this conversation is helping us all to look ahead, maybe a little further ahead than we have been. And John, I appreciate you being on today. This was so informative. It really highlighted the building blocks of the financial support on the government side, Medicare and Medicaid. And I hope that listeners really take away the fact that what we think and what we assume may not be, and to do some homework and due diligence. So thank you for that.
You're absolutely welcome. I'm thrilled to do it because I believe it's just so important. And I just think that it's just very important that we have this understanding and awareness.
At the moment, because as you mentioned, things change.
things change.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Liz.
Now for the legal language. The opinions and information shared in this podcast are for general education and informational purposes only and should not be taken as professional legal, medical, or financial advice, nor should it be a substitute for legal, medical, or financial advice from a professional. We are not lawyers, doctors, or financial advisors, and you should consult with a qualified professional for specific advice related to your situation. All content, including audio, images, and text, is the property of Aging Well Anyway and is protected by copyright. Reproduction or distribution without our express written consent is prohibited. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to leave a comment, like, or share with a friend.